people without, they cut the half of them.
The nearby town of Ras Lanuf has changed hands several times. It's now held by the rebels. According to locals, Gaddafi's men simply withdrew. Now most here are leaving, fearful of what is going to happen.
We are stuck in the middle between both sides and don't know where the bombs are coming from.
What started as a civil uprising is developing into an armed struggle, but not yet a civil war that many fear. The sound of jets above sends the rebels into defense mode, firing widely into the air at a target they cannot see.
There's a military plan. We're afraid of him. Let him, we come here to die.
But only 2 bombs that we know of were dropped, and both missed the large concentrations of fighters and hit the desert, and no one was hurt. Some are wondering whether the pilots are deliberately missing in sympathy with the rebellion. It's one of the many puzzling aspects to this conflict. Fighters, though, say Bin Jawad is only a temporary hold-up. They are preparing to take the fight onwards through Sirte, then Misrata, and then finally Tripoli. No one here, however, predicts what tomorrow may bring. Tony Bertley, AlJazeera, near Bin Jawad, north-central Libya.
Well, as the battles on the ground get more intense, a propaganda war is also raging. Libya's foreign minister has now repeated Muammar Gaddafi's claims that the rebels are getting help from al-Qaeda.
Go back to your files and you will find they were in Guantanamo, and now they're fighting in the eastern part of Libya. This group lives in the same region. I'm telling you, there is al-Qaeda. This is clear evidence. Their files are in Guantanamo.
Well, meanwhile, the French and British missions to the United Nations are working on a draft resolution that would lead to the creation of a no-fly zone over Libya. Earlier, a US government spokesman said it is still considering a military response. Patty Culhane reports.
As the constant gun battles rage, the back and forth for control of a country, and Libyans die in numbers not yet known, the U.S. president sends a message.
We stand for democracy, we stand for an observance of human rights, and that we send a very clear message to the Libyan people that we will stand with them.
But the bigger question for these fighters is how will the U.S. stand with them and when?
I wouldn't characterize the likelihood of further options being pursued as greater now, but we have said from the beginning that those options were on the table, and none of them have been removed from the table.
There's been a lot of talk about this so-called table, so let's take a look at what is supposedly on it. One option, instituting a no-fly zone. That's what the U.S. Senate is pushing for, but the U.S. military has pushed back, saying it would be complicated and would require military strikes. Another option being talked about by some politicians, giving weapons to the rebels.
It would be premature to send a bunch of weapons to a post office box in eastern Libya. We need to not get ahead of ourselves in terms of the options we're pursuing.
The administration says it wants to know more about the rebels first and adds sending weapons is not currently allowed under the existing UN sanctions. The other option, humanitarian assistance. This seems to be where the Obama administration is putting much of its focus, agreeing to give another $15 million to aid groups Monday. Some experts predict that will be the extent of what the U.S. will be willing to do.
It'll lean much more toward humanitarian assistance, like helping the refugees, for example, providing food, rather than actually using military force to attack Gaddafi.
The U.S. president can hear the cries for help from the battlefields, feel the push from the politicians, even in his own party, but in the end, only he can answer the question, what is the U.S. willing to do? Patty Culhane, AlJazeera, Washington.
Well, now, many experts believe that if a no-fly zone is imposed, it will probably have to be done without a United Nations resolution. It's thought that Russia and China would veto any such move. But if some Western countries do act on their own, they would still face massive logistical problems. The U.S. Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, has already made it clear a no-fly zone will not be possible without first destroying Gaddafi's air defense apparatus, which includes missiles and radar installations. Keeping Libyan jets grounded would also require a fleet of around 100 fighters and support crew from a U.S. aircraft carrier. Nearby US bases in Sicily and Crete would also be called into action to sustain any long-term campaign. Now, this could further stretch the US military, which is already heavily engaged in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Hanif Faris is president of the Trans-Arab Research Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, and he says a no-fly zone is not an easy option for ending the crisis in Libya.
Even if it flies, and even if the West is able to buy out the Russians and the Chinese and have them endorse the proposal, it's going to be a very difficult process. However, if it does succeed and the resolution is passed by the Security Council, consider what scenario will occur. It will have to ask NATO to implement the proposal. And within NATO, the only power that has the capability to enforce a no-fly zone is the United States, with token support from countries such as the United Kingdom and France. In this case, if the US becomes involved, and as the Secretary of Defense has said, it's actually waging war on Libya.
The question then has to arise, why isn't the Arab community in a position or have the desire, it seems, to actually do something about this?
Unfortunately, and for a long time, the Arab world has lost its compass. As you said, it's imperative that the Arabs gather and arrange either a multinational Arab force or some form of pressure on Gaddafi to relent and either drop out or allow the resistance and encourage them to achieve their objectives. However, this is not happening. And unfortunately, within such circumstances, we should not, as an Arab world, allow Westerners to come into our countries and use force to effect their objectives.
Well, it was one of Barack Obama's most famous presidential pledges: close the Guantanamo Bay prison camp and move military trials to civilian courts. But the detention center in Cuba remains open, and now Obama appears to have completed his U-turn by giving the order for military trials to resume. John Terrett reports.
Promptly to close. Just after he took office, President Obama promised to keep a campaign pledge and close Guantanamo within 1 year.
It is a rallying cry for our enemies. It sets back the willingness of our allies to work with us in fighting an enemy that operates in scores of countries. By any measure, the cost of keeping it open far exceed the complications involved in closing it.
Obama also stopped the controversial Bush-era military trial system and promised a full review. Now, 2 years on, Guantanamo's still open and the military trials are back. The White House says it's made the system fairer, but critics see it as a return to square one.
The ironic aspect of this is that President Bush established this kind of review mechanism. President Obama set up this kind of a mechanism when he took office, and now this is the third iteration. I have no reason to believe that this new system is going to be any better than the two systems that it has already replaced.
The issue of what to do about Guantanamo Bay has